I wish I could tell you I packed with dignity, that I zipped up my suitcase with grace, left with my chin high, heels clicking against the tile, like I owned it. But that's not how it happened. I was hunched over, stuffing clothes into an old gym bag while Amanda scrolled through her phone like I didn't exist. Chad stood at the kitchen counter eating grapes straight from the bag. He didn't offer me one. That was me. And what you're about to hear is not just a story, but a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching and don't forget subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Lala, I'm 58 years old, and until not too long ago, I thought family meant forever. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. The final words, not even words, really, just him muttering, "We didn't sign up for extra mouths," and Amanda saying, "Maybe it's best, maybe it's best." I think those 3 words will sit somewhere between my ribs until I die. I used to believe in unconditional love. I cooked for them, cleaned, ran their errands when Amanda was exhausted from work and Chad was managing stress with his online poker nights. I thought I was being useful, a soft old sweater in the back of the closet, never flashy, but always warm. Turns out, they saw me as a burden they were too polite to throw out until now. I stepped out into the cold without a coat. That's not metaphorical. I literally forgot my coat. My body was too busy holding in my scream to notice. I had 2 bags and $27. The rest of my savings, what was left after my husband's funeral, was tied up in a joint account. Amanda had helped me open for convenience. I didn't have the login anymore. It's a strange thing, realizing you're officially homeless. You expect it to feel cinematic. Thunderclaps, maybe a rainstorm. But really, it's just quiet. So quiet, it hums. I walked 5 blocks before I found a place that wouldn't ask too many questions. The sign above the door flickered like it was deciding whether it still belonged in this world. BAFTA rests in. I remember thinking it sounded like a bad pun, like the universe was giving me a budget version of rest. Fair enough. The room smelled like someone else's fear. Cigarette smoke lived in the curtains, and the bathroom mirror was permanently fogged in the corners. I turned the key slowly. The lock made a noise like it was trying to warn me, but I stayed. I sat on the edge of the bed with that weird floral polyester blanket and stared at the carpet until my eyes hurt. I wasn't crying. Not yet. Just breathing like someone had to remind me how. Somewhere down the hall, a TV was playing an old sitcom laugh track. It felt obscene. That first night I didn't sleep. I laid back, shoes still on, clutching my bag, like it might grow legs, and walk off. I made a mental list of everyone I'd ever helped, every ride I'd given, every school bake sale I volunteered for, every holiday meal I cooked after my husband passed, like if I tallied it up, it would prove I didn't deserve this. I still don't know why I thought that would help. Here's a weird thing. I used to believe you couldn't feel cold and hot at the same time. But that night, my hands were ice, while my face burned. Like betrayal has its own weather. Internal confession. I kept replaying Amanda's face, not her saying anything mean. She didn't. That was the cruelest part. She just didn't defend me, didn't blink, just stared at her phone like I was a sales call. She'd declined too many times already. I used to imagine getting older as something gentle. You'd grow wise, knit things, give people advice they wouldn't take. But no one tells you that if you age without assets, you become disposable. That's not a pretty thought, I know, but it's true. I was a widow with no income and no plan, in a world run by Chase accounts and 2-day shipping. I had expired. Side note, if you ever want to know what rock bottom smells like, it's stale vending machine crackers and mildew, somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m. I opened the nightstand drawer looking for a Bible, and found a crumpled napkin with lipstick on it instead. The universe has a sense of humor. It's just mean about it. I finally cried when the sunrise hit the motel curtains. Something about morning light doesn't lie. At night, you can pretend it's all a misunderstanding. By day, you know better. The world doesn't pause just because your heart did. One more strange truth before I end this part. I looked in the mirror that morning and didn't recognize myself, but it wasn't the wrinkles or the gray. It was my eyes. They looked like someone who had just woken up from a 20-year. The walls in that motel didn't know me. They didn't ask questions, didn't judge. They just stood there, cracked and quiet, with peeling wallpaper that looked like it gave up around the same time I did. There was a water stain on the ceiling that resembled a dog if you squinted. I started calling him Rusty. That's how lonely I got, naming ceiling stains. Mornings were the hardest. I'd sit on the edge of the bed and wait for a reason to move. No job to go to, no one to make coffee for. I'd boil water in the motel microwave and stir in the instant powder Amanda bought once, just in case. That jar followed me here, like a bitter little souvenir. Somewhere between sips of that chalky excuse for coffee, I began to feel like a ghost. I could walk through the world, invisible, unheard, unfelt. I watched couples argue in parking lots and kids kick gravel near the vending machines. I wanted to shout, "Hey, I'm here. I existed. I mattered once." But even I wouldn't have believed me. Internal confession, I hated how I started keeping track of how long Amanda hadn't responded. I told myself I wasn't counting. But I was. 3 days, then 5, then 1 week, and 4 hours. I sent messages that got progressively shorter. "Hope you're okay. Thinking of you." A heart emoji. Nothing too pushy. Nothing that screamed, "Please say you miss me." And she never did. I had to accept the reality. Amanda wasn't just silent, she was gone. Like someone had erased her with one firm swipe of a chalkboard. You'd think when someone vanishes emotionally, there'd be a sound. But no. Just static. Just empty dot. There was a night, I don't know what day it was anymore, when I sat outside the motel on the concrete step in my socks. Just ... watching. The streetlight flickered. Like it couldn't commit. A woman across the parking lot kept trying to start her car. She hit the wheel and screamed. I respected that, at least, she had the guts to be loud. I wanted to scream too. But instead, I just sat there and whispered a truth I hadn't dared say. Until then, maybe I deserved it. That thought hit me like a punch. Because it came from me. I believed, even if just for a moment, that I somehow earned this exile. That Amanda and Chad's indifference wasn't cruel, it was logical, practical, even deserved. Old age wisdom for you. Grief doesn't just make you sad, it makes you lie to yourself, very convincingly. You start building whole universes where the pain makes sense, just so you can sleep at night. Also, fun side note, that hotel soap never actually lathers properly. You can scrub for days and still feel like you're coated in guilt. Or maybe that's just metaphor. Anyway, around this time, I started going through a box I'd dragged with me from Amanda's place. I didn't even remember packing it. It was mostly old letters, a cracked picture frame, and a birthday card from my late husband with a joke about cholesterol. But underneath all that, a small leather book, brown, worn, edges frayed like it had been chewed by time. I opened it, expecting crossword puzzles or shopping lists. That it was my mother's handwriting. Suddenly I was back in my childhood kitchen, Mom's voice humming old songs while she chopped vegetables. Her perfume some mix of rose water and laundry soap floating in the air. She used to slip notes into my lunchbox. Don't let the mean girls see you cry. You are stronger than you feel. I hadn't thought about that in years. I ran my fingers over the ink, like it could bring her back. The first entries were small things, complaints about grocery prices, notes about weather. Today the sky felt like a bruise. Even in old age, Mom was poetic. Then came the strange part. June 11th, she wrote, "He came again today. Said he wished things were different. That he wished I could be his wife, but he has a family, a name to protect. Margaret will never know. She must never know." I froze. My hands stopped mid-turn of the page. The room buzzed not with noise, but with something heavier, like the air itself leaned in to listen. "He has a family. She must never know. Margaret, that's me." I turned the page. Another entry. Hints, regret, passion, fear. She never named him fully, just initials, HJS. You ever have your whole identity shift by 3 letters? HJS appeared again, and again. Meetings in hotels, envelopes of cash, my mother refusing, then accepting. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. For Margaret's shoes, she wrote once, for her winter coat. I had a winter coat once. Yellow, duck-shaped buttons. I remember. Another entry stopped me cold. February 3rd. He said he'd made arrangements. That if anything ever happened to him, Margaret would be taken care of. A trust, a letter. Mr. Goldstein would know. I whispered that name aloud. Goldstein. It wasn't familiar, not really, but it felt like something like a string pulling at a knot in my chest. And then it clicked. Goldstein was the name I saw just once in a letterhead in my childhood home. My mother had quickly folded it and tucked it away. I must have been 9 or 10. Funny how memory waits until it hurts enough to be useful. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time, I wasn't crying. I was alert, awake in the kind of way you are before a storm. The air crackles. Something's coming. You don't know what, but it's real. Confession. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides shame. I felt curious. Hope is a reckless thing. It sneaks in even when you've deadbolted every door, so I did what I hadn't done in weeks. I pulled out a motel pen, flipped over an old grocery receipt, and started writing a letter. Dear Mr. Goldstein. I stared at that receipt for a long time before writing anything. The motel pen had a cracked cap and the ink stuttered every other word, like it didn't want to be part of this either. But I wrote, slowly, carefully, like every sentence might be read under a microscope. I told him my name, Margaret Louise, daughter of Evelyn Louise Walker. I told him I found her diary, and that it mentioned a man with the initials HJS, a man who made promises through a lawyer named Mr. Goldstein. I didn't demand anything, just asked, kindly, whether he remembered her, whether he remembered me. I was scared to send it. That letter was all I had, a fragile thread connecting my nowhere life to something that might still matter. The motel had a boxy little post office drop at the end of the street. I walked there the next morning in the same sweater I'd worn for 5 days, a blue one, pilled at the elbows. Funny how hope and humiliation often wear the same clothes. I dropped the letter through the metal slot and flinched when it clanged. It felt final, like lighting a match and tossing it into an unknown room. Then, I waited. You'd think waiting would feel familiar by now. I'd waited for Amanda's texts, waited for jobs to call me back, waited for grief to stop sitting on my chest like a heavy cat. But this was different. This wait was electric. 3 days passed, then 5. I started to forget why I was even waiting. I almost convinced myself it had been a mistaken other fantasy born of loneliness and rusted memory. Maybe my mom had made it all up. Maybe HJS stood for hope just sinks. Then, on the 8th day, my motel phone rang. Yes. The room had a landline. I hadn't even remembered plugging it in. It rang twice before I answered, hands shaking, heart in my throat. Hello, I croaked. A pause. Then a man's voice, old but steady. Margaret Louise. I stopped breathing. Yes, this is Leonard Goldstein. I got your letter. The room blurred. I had to sit down. Internal confession. I almost hung up. Some part of me, some scared, exhausted part, wanted to stay in the story I already knew, the one where I was the discarded mother, the forgotten widow, the mistake. But his voice kept going, steady and patient. Your mother, Evelyn. I remember her very well. More than professionally, I'd say. She was kind and proud, and in a lot of ways, braver than the man she loved. I didn't speak, couldn't. The silence on my end stretched long, but he didn't fill it with small talk. He just let it be. After a moment, he said, there's something you should see. It was left for you a long time ago. I never thought I'd actually hand it over, but here we are. He gave me his address in Dallas. A modest office, he said. Nothing fancy. Just him, the dust, and some old files. I hung up and immediately felt like I might throw up. Side note, did you know the average human heart beats about 100,000 times a day? I'm pretty sure mine did double that, just in the next hour. I packed my things slowly, like I was waiting for someone to stop me. But there was no one, just Rusty, the ceiling stain, and the smell of desperation baked into the carpet. I had exactly enough left on my prepaid card to get a Greyhound ticket and a small lunch. I chose the ticket. The bus left at 6:15 a.m. The station was filled with people who looked like me, tired in places no one could see. I sat near the back, beside a woman crocheting with thick green yarn. She didn't speak, but her hands moved with purpose. I envied that we passed flat fields and broken billboards. My reflection in the bus window looked 10 years older than I remembered. But it also looked like someone who had survived something that mattered to me. When I got to Dallas, I stood outside Goldstein's building for 10 minutes, just watching the front door. It was gray, weathered, honest. He met me at the door, shorter than I imagined. Round glasses, kind eyes. You look just like her, he said. I followed him into the office. It smelled like paper and time. His desk was cluttered, but not messy. Books leaned on each other like old friends. He gestured for me to sit, then opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope cream-colored brittle around the edges. My name was written on it in neat script. Your father left this, he said simply. He never stopped thinking about you. I suppose that matters more than it should. I took the envelope with shaking hands. My name, Margaret Louise Looped, elegant in ink, like someone had written it with care. With regret, I opened it. The first line knocked the breath out of me. To my daughter, whom I have loved in silence. I didn't finish the letter in one go. I read 3 lines, then cried, then read 2 more, then cried again. It was like trying to drink from a fire hydrant of emotion. He told the truth. About my mother. About his cowardice. About the systems that kept him from acknowledging me, publicly, family, business, a reputation to protect. He said he hated himself for it. He said he made arrangements to ensure I'd never be left with nothing, and he did. Mr. Goldstein pulled out a folder next. Inside were bank account documents, investment statements, a deed to a piece of land outside Fredericksburg, and a letter of instructions. Total value, over $1 million. I think I whispered something like, "Is this real?" But it felt too small a thing to say. Goldstein nodded. It's yours. Always was. Confession. I didn't feel rich. I felt rewritten, like someone had taken a pen to the margins of my life and scribbled, "You matter." I left the office in a daze. The streets of Dallas were the same, but I wasn't. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I had something that was mine. The strangest thing about getting everything you never expected is how empty it can still feel. I walked out of Mr. Goldstein's office with a folder that could change my life. But inside, I was still the woman who got kicked out by her own daughter. $1 million didn't undo that. It didn't turn the motel nights into warm memories, or erase the silence Amanda sent me like postcards from a better life. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew this money was an opportunity. Maybe not for revenge, but for reclaiming something. Myself. Maybe. I checked into a nicer motel that night. One with actual hot water and pillows that didn't smell like despair. I stood in the shower for nearly an hour, letting the steam peel off layers of sadness. For the first time in weeks, I saw myself in the mirror and didn't flinch. Confession. I did a little dance in the bathroom. Nothing fancy, just a shoulder shimmy and a foot tap, but it was mine. A victory waltz, for one. The next morning, I opened the folder again, rereading every line like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. There were instructions about transferring funds, a suggestion to hire a financial planner, and handwritten notes from my father about a small cabin he once dreamed of retiring to. That part made me laugh. I had never even met the man, and yet, I could picture him there, feet up, whiskey in hand, pretending he wasn't a coward with 2 lives. And now that dream was mine. I decided not to contact Amanda. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I needed time, and space, and distance from her voice in my head saying, maybe it's best. Instead, I started walking. Just aimless wandering. Dallas is not a city made for slow movement. Everyone's in a hurry, even their coffee. But I drifted through neighborhoods, parks, and tiny bookstores that smelled like ink and basement dreams. I needed to feel small, in a place where no one knew my story. Not the version Amanda told. Not the one I'd repeated in motel darkness one afternoon. I passed a thrift shop with a handwritten sign in the window. You are not a burden. You're just in between homes. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper. It shouts in Sharpie. Inside, I bought a scarf and a used notebook. The scarf was ugly chartreuse with embroidered lemons, but it was warm. The notebook, that became my new voice. Page 1, I wrote, this is the story of how I disappeared, and how I'm coming back louder. It felt good. Like claiming land. Odd fact for the day. Lemons used to be so rare in 15th century Europe that aristocrats would pose with them in portraits just to show off. Imagine flexing with a citrus. Anyway. I went to a cafe next. Ordered a latte and sat at a corner table, pretending to read. I watched a woman argue on the phone, her voice sharp as glass. A man nearby was typing furiously, probably rewriting a dating profile or finishing a novel about betrayal and space wizards. And me, I just sat there, invisible again but in a different way, not erased, just unbothed. The financial advisor Goldstein recommended called later that day. Her name was Teresa, and she sounded like someone who knew how to parallel park on the first try. She asked if I wanted to meet. I hesitated, then said yes. The next day, we met at her office. She wore red glasses and had a laugh that came out in sudden bursts, like popcorn. She walked me through the portfolio patiently, kindly. I nodded, pretending I understood more than I did. "You've got options," she said, tapping the papers. "You could live modestly forever. Or invest, travel, start a business. You're not stuck anymore, Lala." That name again, Lala. I had introduced myself as Margaret for so long because it felt safer, more grown up. But Lala was mine. It was what my husband used to call me when I laughed so hard I snorted. Lola, the woman who dances alone in hotel bathrooms. Teresa's eyes softened. "What do you want to do first?" I looked out the window. The city buzzed below, unaware, unconcerned. "I want to feel like I exist again," I said. She nodded, like that was a normal thing to want. "Maybe it is." Later that night, in my new room, with its stiff white comforter and tiny overpriced minibar, I made a list. Lala's list of reappearance: buy proper winter boots, get a haircut that doesn't scream I gave up, visit the cabin, write a letter not to Amanda, but to myself, learn to cook something I've never made before, laugh once a day, even if it's fake. I taped the list to the mirror. It felt ambitious, borderline ridiculous. But maybe that's the point. Old age wisdom for this chapter. Reinvention doesn't need permission. No one's going to mail you an official form that says, "Okay, start over now." You just wake up one day, brush your teeth, and dare to try. Side note, the Motel mini shampoo smells like artificial peaches and regret. Still better than the last place. I fell asleep with the folder tucked under my pillow, like it might whisper instructions while I dreamed. And you know what? That night, I actually slept. No dreams, no ghosts, just the soft hum of a new chapter stretching out its legs. The next morning, I woke up without that familiar weight on my chest. You know the one. It usually arrives before your feet hit the floor, anxiety wearing yesterday's clothes. But that day, nothing, just quiet. I stretched like a cat, yawned, and padded over to the window. The light in Dallas is different in the early morning, pale, almost shy. I stood there for a moment, thinking about nothing in particular, just breathing. Then I remembered the cabin, the one my father mentioned in his letter, the one I didn't even know existed until about 48 hours ago. It felt like a storybook detail, too romantic to be real. But the deed was real. And so was the map Teresa had emailed me after our meeting. A small red X near a place called Willow Bend, about an hour and a half outside of Fredericksburg. Confession. I had never driven further than a Costco on the outskirts of Austin alone, but I was done with being afraid of highways, or silence, or myself. So I rented a car, nothing flashy, just a beige sedan with a faint smell of someone else's fast food, and hit the road. The Texas countryside rolled out like a dusty blanket, fields dotted with cows who looked vaguely unimpressed by my big emotional journey. I passed antique shops with names like Yesterday's Whispers and Junk and Jewels, which, honestly, could be the title of my autobiography. I stopped at a gas station halfway there, grabbed a cherry cola and some weird beef jerky shaped like maple leaves. Quirky side fact: the first beef jerky ever made dates back to ancient Egypt. Pharaohs probably snacked on it while arguing over pyramid angles. Back on the road, the GPS led me down winding roads flanked by whispering trees and graveled driveways that seemed to go nowhere. Finally, the cabin appeared. It wasn't glamorous, not a Pinterest-perfect getaway, but it was solid. A one-story wooden structure with green shutters and a porch swing that swayed in the wind, like it remembered better conversations. There were leaves everywhere, brown, gold, and whispering like old secrets. I parked the car and just sat there. Internal confession. I almost drove away. I had this sudden, irrational fear that opening that door would ruin the fantasy. That it would be musty and moldy and full of broken promises. But I didn't leave. Instead, I got out, walked up to the porch, and turned the key that came taped to the back of the deed folder. The door creaked open like a sigh. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and dust. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and there were cobwebs doing acrobatics in the corners. But it was beautiful. The kind of beauty you have to earn by looking past the mess. The cabin had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen with a gas stove, and a fireplace with a cracked stone hearth. There were old books stacked on the windowsill, a rocking chair by the fire, and a framed photograph on the mantel. Him, Harold James Sterling, my father, in a black and white portrait with stormy eyes, and a smile that didn't quite reach the edges. I touched the frame. "Hi," I whispered. "Guess I made it." I spent the next few hours airing out the place, sweeping leaves off the porch, and peeling back the sheets from the furniture. There was a table by the window with rings in the wood from forgotten coffee cups. A reminder that people had once paused here, thought here, lived. I lit the fireplace, burned a little too much kindling, almost set off the smoke detector, but there wasn't one. Classic. That night, I sat in that rocking chair, with a thick blanket around my shoulders, and my father's letter in my lap. I read it again, this time slower. He talked about regret, like it was a second skin, how he never had the courage to be a real father, but he tried, in his own broken way, to leave me something that mattered. And he had, not just the money, but the space, the story, the truth. I think that was the first time I forgave him, just a little. Side note, I found a tin of loose tea in the cupboard labeled, "Not Poison," which felt like something my mom might have written. That made me smile. The next morning, I made tea in a kettle that squealed like it hadn't been used since the Clinton administration. I took it out to the porch, sipped, and watched the trees sway like they were breathing. A thought crossed my mind. I could live here. Not just hide, live. I had spent so many years serving other people's needs, cooking meals no one appreciated, folding laundry like it was a love language. But this was mine. And maybe it didn't need to be perfect to be sacred. That evening, I started writing. Not a journal, not a letter. A story about a woman who loses everything, finds a cabin in the woods, and discovers that solitude isn't the same thing as loneliness, that you can be alone and still be full. Confession, I wrote for 6 hours straight, didn't even eat dinner, just sat at the table with that weird jerky and a lantern buzzing with tiny moths of inspiration. Maybe I'd share it someday. Maybe not. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel disposable. I felt like a beginning. The third morning in the cabin, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping the roof, like someone typing a message in Morse code. Soft, steady, rhythmic. It was the kind of sound that makes you want to stay under the covers, tucked into warmth, and pretend the world outside doesn't exist. But I didn't stay in bed. I got up, wrapped myself in that lemon ugly scarf from the thrift store, and padded barefoot across the cold wooden floor to the kitchen. The floor creaked a little, like it was just as surprised as I was that I was up before noon. Confession. I had always loved rainy days more than sunny ones. Sunshine is loud. It expects things from you. Rain just lets you be. It's like the world giving you permission to slow down, even stop. I made coffee in a French press I found behind a jar of something, expired. The kind of coffee that smells like possibility. Took it out to the porch and watched the fog roll between the trees like it was looking for something it lost. That morning, I decided to call Amanda. No, wait. Let me be honest. I thought about calling Amanda. The phone was in my hand, her name right there in the contacts, still saved as Amanda. Even though I'd stopped believing in the heart pot a while ago, I stared at it, thumb hovering, stomach tight, but I didn't press it. Why? Because I didn't know what I would say. Or what I wanted to hear. Maybe she was still angry, or worse, indifferent. I could handle hate. Indifference is the real knife. Instead, I sat back and let the phone slip from my hand onto the cushion beside me. Not today, I whispered. Today's for me. Later, I took a walk around the property. It wasn't much, just a few acres. Some trees, a weathered shed, and a patch of land that looked like it once tried to be a garden. But I walked like it was mine. Like every rock and leaf had been waiting for me to come back. There was a little creek out back I hadn't noticed before. Murky, shallow, full of fallen branches. I sat on a mossy log nearby and just watched. Internal confession. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Calm, not the fake kind you plaster on for family dinners. Real calm, like all the noise in my head had finally stepped outside for a smoke break. Quirky fact. Did you know moss can grow faster on the north side of trees because of sunlight patterns? I didn't. I read it in one of the dusty books I found inside the cabin, right between a recipe for squirrel stew and a chapter on respectable outhouse maintenance. As the rain lightened and the clouds peeled away like wet gauze, I saw the sky again, pale soft, the color of quiet. Back inside, I made soup. Just basic vegetable, but I chopped everything by hand, took my time with the carrots, let the onions make me cry, and didn't even blame them. It felt like an act of care for myself, for the version of me that used to make soup while humming, and not because someone was hungry or expecting it. And then, this might sound ridiculous, I set the table. One bowl, one spoon, a cloth napkin I found in a drawer. And I sat there and ate like I had company, like I was the guest of honor at my own life. That evening, I reread the letter from my father again, for the sixth time, I think, and I noticed something I hadn't before, a line near the bottom. I hope this land offers you what I never could: freedom, space, and a reason to keep going. I sat with that line a while, then I stood up and opened the window, let the cool air in, let it bite at my cheeks. I whispered into the dark, I'm still here. The next morning, I went into town. Fredericksburg is a charming place, a little German, a little Texan, a little proud of both. I walked into a hardware store and asked about gardening tools. The young clerk gave me a once-over and said, "For your husband?" I smiled. "Nope, just me and the weeds." I bought gloves, a shovel, and a ridiculous straw hat I'll never wear in public. Then, I passed a bulletin board outside the cafe. There was a flyer for a local writers group that met Thursdays. Open to all, it said. Just bring your words. Confession. I tore off a tab and tucked it in my pocket like a secret. Night, I started clearing the garden. Just a few hours before the sun dipped low. My arms ached, my knees popped, but the dirt under my nails made me feel something close to young. Afterward, I sat on the porch with a cold beer and watched the stars come out one by one, like shy performers stepping onto a dark stage. Old age wisdom. Healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a bowl of soup, a walk to the creek, a garden full of weeds that waits for you anyway. I didn't call Amanda that night either, but I did write her a letter. Didn't send it, just wrote it. Poured everything in: my hurt, my hope, my half-buried love. Folded it, tucked it between the pages of my notebook, and I slept better than I had in a decade. By the end of the first week in the cabin, I realized something unexpected. I didn't miss the noise, the TV always playing in the background, the neighbors arguing through paper-thin motel walls. Even Amanda's voice, once a constant echo in my mind, had faded into something quieter, more like static than sound. Instead, I was starting to hear myself again. Not the version of me shaped by motherhood or marriage, but the me who once stayed up late reading poetry, who liked bad movies and worse jokes, who used to write stories on napkins and hide them in drawers, like secrets. Confession. I found one of those napkin stories folded in an old coat pocket. It was about a girl who lived in a house made of mirrors and spent her days searching for a window. Dramatic, right? But it made me laugh. I remember writing it while Amanda was napping on my chest and thinking, one day, I'll have time to write again. Well, here we are. That morning, I brought the gardening tools out back and started clearing the rest of the plot. It was overgrown, wild, stubborn, but so was I. I yanked weeds with more determination than grace and ended up falling backward into a patch of something thorny. I laughed so hard I scared a bird out of a nearby bush. I used to hate being alone in silence. Now I was talking to robins and apologizing to squirrels. The forest didn't mind my rambling. It was a good listener. By midday, the garden looked like someone had tried to wrestle nature into submission and only half succeeded. But there was progress. Dirt under my fingernails, a sunburn forming on my neck. Honest work. Inside the cabin, I rewarded myself with lemonade and cookies from a box I'd picked up in town, the kind that crumble when you breathe on them. I ate 4, maybe 5. Side note, did you know squirrels can remember the location of up to 10,000 buried nuts? Meanwhile, I can't even remember where I put my reading glasses yesterday. Evolution has a sense of humor. That afternoon, I sat down to write again. Not just my journal, but something fictional. A story about a woman who inherits a stranger's house and discovers it used to belong to her birth father. Too on the nose, probably, but who cares? I was writing, creating, that mattered. Old age wisdom. Creation is the only kind of control we ever really have. When life takes everything, sometimes the only thing left is what you build from scratch. I wrote until the sun dipped low again. Then, I took out the letter I had written to Amanda the night before. I read it once more, this time with a little less emotion and a little more curiosity. Did I mean every word? Yes. Was I ready to send it? Not yet. I put it in an envelope and left it on the table. That night, I made pasta with garlic and olive oil. Simple, comforting. I used to cook that on weeknights when money was tight and energy was tighter. It always reminded me that joy could come from small things, like butter sizzling in a pan, or garlic making your whole house smell like love. I ate on the porch, alone, but not lonely. Confession. I caught myself humming. It was a tune from an old lullaby I used to sing to Amanda, something about stars and dreams and being held. I sang it without meaning to, and when I realized it, I stopped. Then I sang it again, louder. The sky above was velvet and full of stars that looked like pinholes in the curtain of the universe. I let myself imagine that someone was looking down through one of them. Maybe my mom. Maybe even him, Harold James Sterling. I hadn't quite forgiven him, not completely, but the hate had softened around the edges. I understood now what fear could do to a person, how it could rob you of courage and turn love into secrets. That night, I dreamed I was a little girl again, walking through a garden that looked suspiciously like my overgrown backyard. My mother was there, wearing that lemon scarf, and she smiled, without saying anything, just opened her arms, and I ran into them like I used to when the world felt too big. When I woke up, I felt something different. Peace. No. Hope. It was smaller than peace, but somehow stronger. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the morning breeze carry away the stale corners of the cabin. Later, I sat at the table, took out a blank sheet of paper, and started a new letter. This one wasn't for Amanda, it was for me. Dear Lala, you made it. Not to the end, but to the middle. And that's where the good stuff begins. You've carried everyone for so long. It's okay now to let the ground carry you. Let the wind help you stand. Let joy feel like something you don't have to earn. You are not too late. You are not forgotten. You're right on time. I folded the letter and tucked it in my notebook, right behind Amanda's. One day she might read hers, or not, but me. I was reading mine every chance I got, because some words are worth believing even if you have to write them yourself. The day I planted my first seeds, the sky was so blue, it almost hurt to look at. A kind of blue that demands your attention. Like a kid shouting, "Look what I can do," at the top of a jungle gym. Loud, bold, unapologetically there. I started with tomatoes, mostly because I knew what they were and how they grew, mostly because I liked them. The garden still looked like a battlefield. Patches of cleared dirt, a few uneven rows, and sticks marking what was what, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. I got on my knees, pressed seeds into the soil like they were promises, covered them gently, whispered, "Grow well, little guys," like it was a prayer. Confession. I hadn't prayed in years. Not since my husband died and the silence from whatever God was out there became too heavy to argue with. But planting felt like faith, like a tiny rebellion against despair. A way of saying, I still believe in beginnings. Later that afternoon, I went into town again. Not for tools or food. I just wanted to see people. I walked into the library, a small, two-room building that smelt like old books and coffee breaths. There was a bulletin board near the checkout desk, covered in flyers. Community yoga, dog adoption days, a chili cook-off that promised prizes and gastrointestinal adventure. And then I saw it again. That writers group flyer. Thursdays at 6 p.m., back room of the town cafe. Open to all. Bring your words. I stood there staring at it for a solid minute. Internal confession. My hand was sweating. My throat felt tight. I almost walked away, but I didn't. I pulled the tab off the bottom of the flyer, folded it carefully, and tucked it in my wallet. Then I went home. That evening, I found an old recipe card in one of the cabin drawers. It was written in my mother's handwriting, faint and curling around the edges. Honey cornbread for good days and bad. I laughed out loud. She had always baked her feelings. Sad, pie, happy, pie, tired, cornbread. I made it that night. The batter was lumpy, the oven a little too hot, but the smell filled the cabin like something familiar had come home. I ate 3 pieces before even sitting down. Then I poured some tea and wrote another story. This one about a woman who sends her grown daughter postcards from every state she's never visited, even if she never gets a reply. The kind of story that ends quietly, not with closure, but with possibility. Odd fact of the day. The world's oldest postcard dates back to the 19th century, and was basically just a slab of cardboard with a bad drawing on it. So basically, like Instagram now, but without the filters. The next morning, I opened the mailbox out front. I hadn't checked it since arriving. Inside, one letter, from the lawyer, Mr. Goldstein. It was a formality, just documents, finalizing the transfer of ownership for the property. But there was a sticky note attached that read, P.S. He used to talk about this place a lot, said it was quiet enough to think in. I hope it brings you peace too. I pressed the note against my chest and closed my eyes. Quiet enough to think in. That was exactly what I'd found here. Later, while walking near the creek, I found a smooth, stone-shaped, almost like a heart. I know, cheesy, but I picked it up anyway. Put it on the windowsill back inside. A little reminder that the world still makes time for soft edges in hard places. I started a new habit that week. Mornings in the garden, afternoons writing, evenings reading on the porch. Sometimes I'd think about Amanda, not with anger, more like curiosity, like when you wonder if someone you used to know still likes the same music, or if they've changed the way they part their hair. One night, I pulled out that unsent letter to her and read it again. Then I opened a new page and wrote another. This one was simpler. Hi Amanda, I'm doing okay. I hope you are too. This isn't about blame or hurt. It's just about being human and trying again. I planted tomatoes today. You used to hate tomatoes unless they were in ketchup. Remember that. Love, Mom. I didn't seal that letter either, but I left it on the table, under a paperweight shaped like a frog. Some words don't need to travel to matter. Old age wisdom. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over punishment. Yourself over the past. The wind picked up outside. The kind that carries stories. And I thought, maybe that's what I am now. Not a woman who was left behind, but one who is finally catching up to herself. A week passed before I realized it had been a week. That's how you know healing is sneaky. 1 minute you're counting the hours between breakdowns. The next you're losing track of days because you were busy being ... fine. Not happy, not yet, but fine. And honestly, that was enough. The tomatoes had started to peek through the dirt, tiny green shoots with the nerve to exist in a world that had nearly crushed me. I knelt beside them like a proud grandmother and whispered, look at you, just look at you. Confession. I named one of them, Gerald. Don't ask me why. It just looked like a Gerald. That morning, I decided I would go to the writers' group. It was Thursday. After all, the flyer hadn't left my wallet. Neither had the fear, but fear had stopped running the show. I put on a shirt that didn't smell like the cabin, combed my hair into something less frightening, and drove into town with the radio off. I wanted to arrive with my own noise still intact. The cafe was warm and buzzing, a soft hum of clinking mugs and casual laughter. I stood at the door of the back room for a full minute before stepping inside. There were 6 people seated in a circle, younger, messy-haired, and soft-spoken. The leader, a woman with silver braids and glasses that slid down her nose, looked up and smiled. You're Margaret, right? We saved you a seat. Just like that. Like they'd been waiting for me all along. I sat, introduced myself, tried not to explain. Internal confession. I had a speech in my head, something dramatic and full of metaphors, but I just said, hi, I haven't written in a while, I'm trying again, and that was enough. Everyone took turns reading something, a poem about soup, a funny essay on bad dates, a short story about a dog that learns to tap dance. Odd fact, I looked it up later, there is a real dog on YouTube who can kinda sorta tap dance, so I guess anything is possible. When it was my turn, I froze. Then I reached into my notebook and pulled out the story I'd written about the postcards. My voice shook, but I read it anyway. When I finished, there was a long pause. Not awkward just ... full . Then the woman with silver braids said softly, that was beautiful. And suddenly, I was crying, sobbing, just leaking quietly, like a roof that finally gives in after years of holding back rain. They didn't stare. They didn't rush in with platitudes. They just sat with me in that moment like it was a fire we all needed to warm our hands by. After the meeting, one of the members handed me a card. Her name was Shari, and she ran a local zine. If you ever want to submit something, she said, I think people would want to read your voice. My voice, not my story, not my trauma, my voice. I walked out of that cafe lighter than I had in years. The sky was dark and moody, low clouds threatening rain. I didn't rush. I let the air move through me. Let the streets tell me their secrets. At home, I made tea and read through the zine. It was full of strange, wonderful things, poems about birds, essays about silence, one comic about a talking shoe that had very strong opinions on marriage, old age wisdom. Community doesn't have to be big to be real. Sometimes it's just 6 people in a cafe sharing words and holding space. That night, I finally sealed the letter to Amanda. No dramatic speech, no last-minute edits. Just sealed it, addressed it, walked it out to the mailbox, under a silver moon, and dropped it in. I stood there for a long time afterward, staring up at the sky. Whatever happens, I whispered, I did this. I had reached out. She might not write back. She might never forgive me. But I had opened the door. And the thing about doors is they don't care who steps through. They just wait, quietly, faithfully, in case someone does. Back inside, I found Gerald the tomato, still standing tall in his little row. Don't get too cocky, I said. There's still a lot of summer left. But I was smiling when I said it. I wrote another story that night. This one about a woman who builds a cabin with her own hands after everyone forgets her name. She doesn't do it to prove anything, just because it gives her something to hold. Sometimes that's all we need. The letter was gone. It had been 2 days, and I couldn't stop checking the mailbox. It was ridiculous. I know. Mail doesn't work that fast. Healing doesn't either. But my heart kept doing this thing every time I opened that metal door. It braced itself for a miracle. Confession. I even imagined how it would go. She'd write back something short and sweet. Maybe, I miss you. Or maybe she'd call, and I'd pick up and she'd say, Mom, like it was a question and an answer all at once. But each time, the box was empty, or worse, filled with bills and real estate ads addressed to current resident. I'm not going to lie, it stung, more than I thought it would. I had told myself the letter was about closure, about doing the thing, not about getting anything back. But we're human. We don't let go cleanly. To distract myself, I threw myself into the garden. Gerald, the tomato, was doing surprisingly well. I gave him a few new neighbors, basil lettuce, and some suspicious-looking carrots that might just be orange weeds. I watered and weeded like it was my full-time job. Even got a bit of a tan, well, more like a streaky sunburn across my left arm. It gave me character. That afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nobody knocked here. Not since the postman accidentally delivered someone else's junk mail and mumbled an apology, like he was scared of trees. I opened it. It was a teenager, maybe 17, skinny, nervous, holding a dog leash without a dog attached to it. Hi, he said. I'm Toby. My dog ran through your backyard. I think mind if I check? I blinked. Sure. What does he look like? Terrified, but also like a burrito. He's a pug. 5 minutes later, we found Burrito. That was actually his name, hiding under the porch, eyes wide, completely convinced the world was ending. Toby thanked me about 40 times, and as he turned to go, he looked at my garden and said, You, live here? Yup. Alone? Yup. He gave me the kind of look kids give their grandparents when they realize old people actually choose to live without Wi-Fi. But then he said, That's kinda cool. Peaceful, old age wisdom. Teenagers don't hand out compliments. So, when they do, frame it, or at least mentally high-five yourself. That night, I wrote about Burrito. In the story, he was a secret agent sent to protect lonely old women from emotional sabotage. He wore sunglasses and everything. Then, finally, the mailbox held something. Not a letter, a postcard. It was simple, no return address, just one sentence. The house is quiet without you. I stared at it for a long time. Not crying, just ... still. 1,000 thoughts flooded in. What did it mean? Was she sorry? Was this a start, an end? I didn't know, so I just stood there on the porch, holding the card in my hand, letting the breeze play with my hair like it used to when I was a girl on swings, believing the sky would catch me if I fell high enough. That night, I slept with the card on my bedside table. I didn't write back, not yet. I let the moment breathe. Odd fact. Postcards were originally invented to save money on stamps. Imagine that, something so heartfelt born out of frugality, kind of like motherhood. The next day, I wrote again, about a mother and daughter who speak, only in postcards, never letters, because postcards don't expect long explanations. They're just fragments, fleeting. Honest, I started to realize something. I wasn't just writing about myself anymore. I was writing for myself, creating characters who hurt like me, but also healed in ways I hadn't considered. One of them built birdhouses, another started hiking mountains. One bought a motorcycle and joined a club called the Rusty Rebels. Okay, maybe I got carried away, but the stories were mine. They were freedom. Another confession. I started imagining my life like it was a novel. Chapter 47, The Tomato Uprising. Chapter 48, The Pug Mission. Chapter 49, The Quietest Reply. That's the thing about stories. They let you keep going when reality pauses. And my reality, it wasn't perfect, but it was, okay. One evening, I sat outside with a glass of iced tea, staring at Gerald, wondering if tomatoes could understand gratitude. The wind rustled through the leaves. A bird sang something so high and bright it hurt a little. And for a moment, I let myself feel proud. I had been erased, and I'd written myself back. I woke up the next morning to a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Laughter. Not mine, not yet, but real, and close enough to make me think I'd dreamed it. It turned out Toby the teenager with the missing pug had come by with Burrito again. Apparently, Burrito liked my yard better than his own, and I seemed less emotionally unstable than his mom's new boyfriend. His words, not mine. Toby had taken to calling me Miss M, which I kind of liked. It made me feel like a mysterious librarian from a magical boarding school. I told him he could help in the garden if he wasn't allergic to dirt or accountability. He showed up the next day with gloves too big for his hands and a playlist full of weird indie music and anime theme songs. I pretended not to enjoy it, but I did. We planted radishes and argued about whether squirrels have mafia-like hierarchies. They definitely do. You can't tell me those twitchy tails and power moves don't mean something. Confession. I didn't realize how much I missed having someone to talk to without editing myself first. Toby asked questions. Honest, unfiltered ones. Do you ever get bored out here? Were you scared to be alone? Do you think Amanda's gonna come around? I didn't dodge. I was terrified at first, I said one day, wiping sweat off my brow. But there's a peace in rebuilding your life with your own hands. He nodded. My mom always says people don't change. I think she's wrong. And just like that, I felt a little less alone in the world. A few days later, a package arrived. It was a book. One I'd loaned Amanda years ago, Margaret Atwood, her favorite author. Inside was a sticky note. Found this in my closet. Thought you might want it back. A still no apology, no deep letter, but something. A breadcrumb on the trail back to us. I held the book to my chest. The pages still smelled faintly like our old house. Or maybe I just wanted them to. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk. The air was cool, and the stars were clearer than any city sky could offer. I followed the path near the creek, listened to frogs bicker like elderly siblings, and thought about how small and large the world could be. All at once, odd fact. Some frogs survive winter by freezing completely, like popsicles with legs. Then, they thaw and hop away, like nothing ever happened. People aren't that different. We freeze when it gets too hard. We survive. Then, one day, we start moving again. I sat on a fallen log and stared at the moon. I'm still here, I whispered, and I'm not done yet. The next morning, I made a list. Not a to-do list, a to-be list. Be kind, even if no one notices. Be strong, even when it feels fake. Be curious, especially about myself, but done apologizing for taking up space. I tacked it to the fridge, right next to Gerald's latest height measurement. He was getting cocky. Toby and I decided to try composting. It was smelly, chaotic, and surprisingly satisfying, like yelling into a pillow made of banana peels and coffee grounds. Confession, I may have started naming the worms. One of them is Phyllis. She looks like she knows secrets. And I wrote. Every day. Some days, the words came like waterfalls. Other days, they came like reluctant toddlers dragging their feet. But I wrote. The next writers group meeting, I read a piece about a woman who invents a machine that records feelings instead of sounds. She plays back her memories, not to wallow in them, but to understand them better. Shari, the zine editor, leaned over and whispered, I'd like to publish this. I blinked. But it's weird, I said. Exactly, she smiled. The world needs more weird, old-age wisdom. The best stories are the ones that don't fit neatly into any box. Boxers are for shipping, not for living. On the way home that night, I stopped at the grocery store and bought a pint of strawberry ice cream. Amanda hated strawberry, said it tasted like perfume, but I loved it, so I ate the whole thing on the porch, barefoot, watching the fireflies blink like Morse code in the grass. and for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Out loud. Nobody heard it, but that wasn't the point. 3 days later, Amanda called up, the phone lit up with her name, and for a moment, I just stared at it. It felt like seeing a ghost, a familiar ghost, wearing old pajamas and asking if I'd remembered to buy milk. I didn't answer right away. Confession, I let it ring once, twice, because I was afraid. Afraid this would be the apology I'd dreamed of. Or that it wouldn't be. That she'd say something that would unmake everything I had carefully rebuilt with compost and ink and tomato vines. On the fourth ring, I picked up, "Hi Mom," just those 2 words. Her voice sounded tight. Not cold, just ... cautious, like she wasn't sure what version of me would answer. "Hi," I said softly. Then there was silence. You know how in movies they cut to dramatic violins or slow zooms during big reunions? Real life is quieter and more awkward. There was no music, just me gripping the phone like it was a rope dangling over a cliff. "I got your letter," she said finally. "And the postcard ... I meant it." "I know," I whispered. I didn't know what to say back. She said, her voice cracking, "Just a little. Still don't. I'm sorry. About all of it." I waited, not out of spite, but because some things don't need to be filled in right away. We both sat in that long pause together. "I'm doing better now," I said. "And I'm okay. Really. You sound different." "Maybe I am. Odd fact. A single summer can make tomato plants grow 5 feet, but it can also make a woman grow a backbone." Amanda let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for months. "Chad and we're separating," she said. That caught me off guard. Not because I didn't expect it, just because hearing it out loud felt heavy. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I'm not," she replied. "I think I knew for a while, but everything just felt too messy, and I didn't want to add you to the mess." I wanted to tell her I could have handled the mess, that I had years of experience with messes, emotional, physical, culinary, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "We all have our breaking points and our starting lines." She was quiet again. Then, in a smaller voice, she said, "Do you think we can talk more? I'm not asking to come visit or anything. I miss you." "I miss you too," I said. "Start with this. We're talking now." She laughed. Just a little. A real laugh. Tired, but real. Before we hung up, she asked me to send her one of my stories. "The weirdest one," she said. "The more absurd, the better." Challenge accepted. After we said goodbye, I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I walked out to the garden and sat next to Gerald, who was now large enough to warrant a trellis. "You won't believe what just happened," I told him. He didn't answer. Tomatoes are terrible conversational ISTs. That week, I wrote a story about a woman whose tomato plant becomes sentient and starts offering unsolicited life advice. I emailed it to Amanda with the subject line, "You asked for weird. You're welcome." She replied 10 minutes later, "Gerald is wise beyond his vines." God, I loved that girl. Toby dropped by again that weekend. This time, with 2 pugs, his cousins in town. He explained like it was the most normal thing in the world. We sat on the porch while the dogs snorted and wrestled in the yard. "Miss M," he said, "you ever think about writing a book?" I blinked. "A book? Yeah, like full-on published. You've got stories, you've got voice. I mean, come on." I smiled. "You're trying to be my literary agent?" He shrugged. "I work for snacks. Old age wisdom. You never outgrow peanut butter sandwiches, especially when someone else makes them." Later that night, I sat at my desk, lit the candle I only used for serious writing, and stared at the blank page. A book. The idea had been circling me like a patient hawk. I'd just never let it land. Until now. I began typing. Not about Amanda. Not about Chad. Not even about Gerald, but about the woman who wakes up in the middle of nowhere and decides that survival isn't enough. She wants transformation. The story had magic in it, and compost, and a bird that speaks in riddles and quotes dead poets. Confession. I might be turning into one of those weird nature ladies who names her worms and talks to birds and writes fantasy novels from a cabin. I think I'm okay with that. That night, I went to bed with the window open. The wind carried in the smell of earth and wild things, and the stars above me winked like they knew something I didn't. But I was learning. 1 page at a time. About 2 weeks after Amanda's call, I received another envelope in the mail. No return address again, but the handwriting was unmistakable hers. This time, there was a letter. Actual pages. folded carefully, like she didn't want the words to spill out too fast. I sat down on the porch swing, barefoot, a cup of coffee in hand, Burrito, the pug, snoozing by my feet. "Dear Mom," it began. She wrote about things I hadn't known, how she'd been quietly going to therapy, how she'd started journaling, how Chad had made her feel small in ways she couldn't articulate when I was there, how it had taken seeing me pack up and leave, not crying, not begging, just walking out. That shook something loose in her. She admitted she hadn't defended me the way she should have, that she thought she was keeping the peace, but what she was really doing was trying to avoid looking at the truth. "I kept choosing quiet over kindness," she wrote. "I'm sorry." I stopped reading right there, not because I was angry, just the opposite. I was full. That one sentence felt like it reached backward through all those empty days and made a crack in them wide enough for light to come through. I finished the letter. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly, but she left room for it. She asked if we could talk again. Not fix everything, not pretend it hadn't happened, but rebuild something different. Confession. I reread it 3 times before I could even start writing back. This time, I told her about Toby and Burrito, about the sentient tomatoes story, and how Gerald might need his own social media account soon. I told her I missed her voice, that I wanted to talk, not just about the past, but about who we were now. She called again the next night. We laughed. We talked about books and what she was reading, and how she'd started listening to weird ambient playlists to sleep. I recommended whale sounds and wind chimes. She said I was definitely becoming a forest witch, and she loved that for me. And then, she said something I'll never forget. "You were never the problem. I just didn't want to admit what was planted." Was like a key turning inside me. Not unlocking the door completely, but at least hearing the tumblers shift. Odd fact. The average key only weighs about 30 grams, but it can open a door to a whole other world. That Sunday, Toby and I painted birdhouses. His was neon green with a glitter roof. Mine was purple with tiny hand-painted vines. "I think the birds are going to judge mine," he said, squinting at his sparkly disaster. "Nah," I replied, "birds love chaos. Look at their nests." He grinned. "Fair." Later that week, Shari from the writing group emailed again. She wanted to feature 2 of my stories back-to-back in the next zine issue. I stared at the email for a long time, before responding, not because I didn't want to, but because that little voice that used to whisper, "You're not enough," was finally getting drowned out. Old age wisdom. Sometimes, growth is silent, like moss spreading on stone. You don't notice it until everything's green. Amanda sent another postcard. This one had a photo of a beach we used to visit when she was little. She'd scrawled, "Remember this, I still have the seashells." I put it on the fridge next to my to-be list. That night, I started outlining the book Toby kept bugging me to write. Not just stories stitched together, but one story mine, and not mine. A tapestry of mother-daughter echoes, heartbreak, healing, pugs, tomatoes, and birdhouses. I even gave it a working title, The Quiet Comeback. Corny, maybe, but it felt right. Confession. I still worried she might pull away again, that this piece was fragile, like a paper crane balancing in a breeze. But that's life. It's never not risky. The next time Amanda called, she said, "Would it be okay if I visited?" I paused. Not because I didn't want her to, but because I wanted to make sure I was saying yes for the right reasons. "Yes," I said, "but only if you're coming as yourself, and not out of guilt." She was quiet, then replied, "I wouldn't come any other way." We set a date, just a weekend, no expectations, no timelines. After we hung up, I looked around the little cabin, and suddenly saw it with new eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And it had room, not just physically, but emotionally. Room for uncomfortable conversations. Room for Grace. Room for Gerald's second cousin, who was growing next to the compost bin like he owned the place. Burrito barked at the wind that night. Toby said it was a sign of spiritual awakening. I said it was more likely raccoons. Either way, I felt awake, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Amanda arrived on a Friday afternoon. I heard her before I saw her old boots crunching the gravel driveway, the hesitant rhythm of someone trying not to be too loud. Burrito rushed the front window like he'd been waiting for this moment, his whole pug life. I walked to the door, and for a second, I just stood there, hand on the knob, breathing. Then I opened it. There she was, my daughter. Older than I remembered, even though it had only been a year. Her hair was longer, her shoulders a little more squared, but her eyes, still that same stormy shade of blue she'd had since she was a baby. "Hi," she said, a little breathless. "Hey kiddo," I replied. We didn't rush into a hug. We didn't need to. There was something reverent about just being in the same space again, like the air itself had to recalibrate. She stepped inside, and the first thing she noticed was Gerald. "That's him?" she asked, walking toward the tomato plant like she was approaching royalty. "That's Gerald," I confirmed. "He has opinions." She laughed a real one and reached out to touch a leaf. Burrito circled her feet like a fluffy little satellite, and she leaned down to scratch behind his ears. "He's even more ridiculous than in your stories." "I don't lie about the important stuff," I said, handing her a glass of lemonade. Confession. I made her favorite kind lavender and lemon, but I didn't tell her that right away. Sat on the porch for a while, watching the sun dip behind the trees, casting long golden stripes across the field. It was quiet, but not heavy. "You've made something really beautiful here, Mom," she said. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, still isn't, some days." "I know," she replied. "I didn't expect it to be, but I wanted to see it. I wanted to see you." That night, we cooked together. Chicken pot pie, yes, that one. But this time, we laughed while making it. She chopped veggies, I rolled the dough. We listened to soft music, something folky and warm, and the silence between us was no longer awkward, it was restful. Odd fact, some bird species sleep with one half of their brain at a time. It's called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. I told Amanda this while we were waiting for the pie to bake, and she said, "Sounds like what I was doing the entire last year." Old age wisdom. Sometimes, rest isn't about doing nothing, it's about doing something that makes your soul breathe easier. After dinner, we sat on the floor and went through my box of old letters, postcards, and photos. "God, look at my bangs," Amanda said, holding up a photo of her 10-year-old self with a bowl cut. "Why did you let me do that?" "You insisted," I laughed. "You said you wanted to look like a skater librarian." "Well, mission accomplished." She grew quiet, holding one of the photos of her dad. "I miss him," she said. "I think part of why I got so angry after he died was because I didn't know where to put all that grief." I nodded. Grief doesn't like neat boxes. It seeps. It shows up in weird places, like kitchen arguments or the way we ghost people who love us. We sat in that truth for a while. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm not perfect. I know that now. I never wanted perfect," I said. "I just wanted honest." The moon rose higher, and we moved out to the porch again. Amanda wrapped herself in a quilt, and we just existed. No fixing, no rehashing, just being. "You know what I realized?" she asked. "You were always strong. I just couldn't see it because I was so busy being scared." "We're all scared," I replied. "But fear's not a stop sign. It's just a blinking light that says, maybe slow down and look around." She laughed. "You've been reading fortune cookies again." "Only the expired ones." Later, she asked if she could sleep in the loft. I said of course. I didn't clean it. I didn't fluff the pillows. I didn't perform motherhood like a hostess at a bed and breakfast. I just handed her a flashlight and said, "Watch out for the second step. It's squeaky." She hugged me before going upstairs. It was a long hug, like we were pressing broken pieces back together, not to make them perfect, but to make them whole again. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The wind moved through the trees outside, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to be braced for anything. No hidden knives, no empty boxes, no locked doors, just breath, just softness, just my daughter, sleeping upstairs, maybe dreaming of tomato plants that whisper advice and pugs who snore like chainsaws. I smiled into the dark, and I slept, really slept. Amanda stayed the whole weekend. We didn't make a big deal out of it, no mother-daughter bonding itinerary, no forced conversations about forgiveness or the past. It unfolded naturally, like dew on morning grass. Saturday morning, we made pancakes. I let her burn the first batch because she got distracted by Burrito, who was trying to sit in the skillet. Typical. We took a walk after breakfast, following the narrow trail through the woods behind the cabin. I showed her the creek I liked to sit by when writing. She skipped a stone across the surface 5 bounces and we both clapped like little kids. "You know," she said, "this place is kind of magic." "I keep telling people," I replied. "No one believes me." Confession. I didn't expect to feel so peaceful. I thought seeing her again might stir things up in me, resentment, sorrow, all the hurt, but instead, I felt like a lake after the storm has passed. Still, a little cloudy, sure, but calm. That we passed an old tree that had fallen, roots exposed like a sculpture. Amanda ran her fingers along the bark. I used to think strength was about standing tall, she said. Now I think it's about staying rooted, even when you're sideways. Are you quoting me? I asked, teasing. Maybe, she smiled. You say weird stuff. We spent the afternoon painting again. She made a sign for Gerald's pot that read, "Talk less, ripen more." I told her that was dangerously close to wisdom. She asked about my book. I told her I'd written 3 chapters and had no idea how it ended. Good, she said. That means you're not pretending you have all the answers. That night, over hot tea, we finally talked about the harder parts. Chad left the messages that went unanswered. She cried. So did I. It was messy, but not in the way that ruins things. Messy in the way real healing looks, with pauses, and interruptions, and moments when you forget the timeline because the truth is more important than the details. I didn't know how to choose you, she said. I thought choosing you meant betraying him, but I see now. It wasn't a choice between people, it was a choice between love and comfort. And comfort won, I said quietly. Yeah, for a while. Odd fact, the human brain can actually shrink when under chronic emotional stress. Amanda said she felt like her thoughts were smaller back then, more cramped, like I couldn't think past the walls we'd built. Old age wisdom. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they were wrong, out loud. We ended the night with a fire in the pit behind the cabin. Burrito was curled up in Amanda's lap, his little chest rising and falling with cartoonish drama. We didn't say much. The fire crackled, the stars blinked. I handed her a marshmallow, and she burned it to ash on the first try. I'm out of practice, she said, laughing. Better to burn something sweet than let it rot untouched, I replied. She looked at me. You've changed, so have you, and that was enough. The next morning, she left early. She had a flight back, work on Monday. But before she drove off, we stood beside her car and hugged again. This one was different than the last. Lighter, looser, still strong. Come visit me sometime, she said. I think the place is less haunted now. I raised an eyebrow. Haunted? Well, she grinned. There was a ghost of guilt in the hallway. I think you took it with you. I waved her off, and Burrito chased the dust. Her tires kicked, up until it settled. Then I went back inside, made tea, and opened the laptop. Typed out the next sentence of my book. She didn't come back to fix the past. She came to plant something new. And I knew, then, that whatever the ending was, it wouldn't be tragic. Not anymore. Weeks passed. Amanda and I kept talking. Sometimes just memes. Sometimes full phone calls about nothing. But it was steady. Honest. Toby helped me finish the garden fence. Gerald got his first little green tomatoes. The birds came back. So did the bees. Life buzzed, quietly but clearly. I even submitted a story to a magazine. Got a polite rejection and didn't cry about it. Progress. And one day, sitting by the creek, I realized something strange. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not waiting for an apology. Not waiting for proof that I mattered. Not even waiting to be seen, because I already saw myself. And honestly, I liked who I was turning into. Word count 1089. Final summary. If you're still here, still listening, still wide-eyed in the quiet, thank you. We've come a long way together, haven't we? From that cold curb where I once sat feeling forgotten, to this warm space where I'm finally growing again. The truth is, no one tells you how often you'll have to rebuild. That family can break your heart even when they love you. That sometimes, the life you built with care can vanish like steam on glass. But it doesn't mean you're finished. Sometimes it just means you're free to begin again. So if you're holding grief, or guilt, or a silence that's lasted too long, remember. You can always plant something new. Even in the wreckage. Even in the stillness. Even when no one's watching. Now, take a deep breath. You've earned it. Let the stars blur a little. Let the fan hum. Let the world slow. And if your heart feels a little fuller now, that's not by accident. Good night, friends.